We're talking today with Jim Rosin of Wyoming, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Jim, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Okay, I was born in 1947, September, in Bay City, Michigan, and lived there all my adolescent life, and I went to high school at Bay City Central High School. I graduated in 1965, and in the summer of '66, I went to work for a company in Saginaw, Michigan, that sold bakery equipment. And then in the summer of '66, I was asked to come down to Detroit for the physical for the military for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
So went down to Detroit, had the physical, came back, got the notice that I was qualified for military service. So didn't know when. At that time, Vietnam in '66, early '66, Vietnam was starting to ramp up,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of publicity, but I don't think there was the animosity towards Vietnam at that point.
Okay.
You know, so.
To back up a little bit, when you did the physical, how serious a physical was it?
Oh, it was serious. Yeah, they stripped you right down and took X-rays and did the whole works. I had an appendicitis earlier that year, and I had the scar on my abdomen, and they were quite curious about that, what that was, you know, and all that. So, but again, I was cleared physically to be able to do that.
Okay.
So.
Because I guess later on, a lot of the descriptions are more cursory. They just, you know, can you breathe? Yes, okay.
Yeah, no.
But at that point, they did not need the huge numbers that they would need. Even late in '66, there was a very large draft out of Michigan. But
Right.
what you were doing your physical a little bit ahead of all of that.
Yes.
So at the point when you're called for the physical, you don't actually know whether or not you're going to be drafted at all.
Right.
This is just part of the system.
Yes,
Okay.
correct. I was part of the system, and they didn't have the numbers then, the draft numbers or anything like that.
Yeah.
You were considered, I guess I was considered 1A
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. So, which was fine. So I went through the summer and waiting for the letter to come. And it finally came, I believe, the end of August of 1966, that I was to report for transfer and going into the Army in October 20th, 1966.
Okay. So where do you report first?
I reported to the courthouse in Bay City first, and they checked us off, and then they loaded us on a bus and took us down to Detroit again, the same place where we had the physical.
Fort Wayne?
And yeah, at Fort Wayne. I couldn't think of the name of it, but that's it. You know, and it was a really kind of a dilapidated place at that.
Place.
It is. It was very run down. And in fact, when we went down there for the physical, we had to spend the night. And they put us in this hotel in downtown Detroit that was really nasty, you know, in 1966. We didn't even, in fact, the guys wanted to go out and get a drink and get a beer and all that stuff. Of course, we weren't of age or anything like that, but we stayed in the hotel, needless to say, and some guys snuck in some beer for us, so we did have a couple beers that night. But yeah, it was an interesting start.
Okay.
And then, go ahead.
I guess I was wondering, you know, did you just accept the fact that, okay, at some point you were going to be in the service, you weren't looking for ways to get out of it, or?
No, I did have some back issues when I was in high school. I had an infection in my lower lumbar vertebrae, but they took X-rays and they said that's all cleared up. You know, you're not you're good to go. So I said, okay, fine. I was, you know, of course you're a little hesitant about it, but.
And did you know anything about Vietnam before you went in?
Yeah, we knew what we heard on the news, and I didn't study it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we knew what we saw on TV, and some of the fighting going on over there, and some of the reasons we were there. You know, the reasons we were building up over there.
And what were those reasons at that point?
Well, it was just that they thought, I think they thought they would go in there and just take over, clear them out, but it was a lot stronger force, you know, the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army,
Mhm.
the Viet Cong, and the influx of the Chinese weapons from China, from the communist China, into Vietnam. You know, artillery, small arms, you know, and all that type of thing.
Mhm.
So it was interesting because, you know, there was no, when we got on the bus and we went down to Detroit, there was no dissension among the guys.
Mhm.
You know, they were all saying, well, you know, we're going to go and do our best, and hopefully we'll get home, you know,
Yeah.
in one piece.
Did you
So-
see yourself as going off to fight communism, or just because Uncle Sam was sending you?
Yeah, in a way we did. We saw that communism was taking over in that part of the world, and if we could nip that in the bud and help them, you know, that would be great.
Okay. So we've got you on the bus heading on down, and where are you going? Well, I guess you got to Fort, that was on the way to Fort Wayne.
Yeah, well,
From-
that's when we took our oath,
Mhm.
you know, and that was an interesting the way they did that. Have you heard of how they did that?
Go ahead.
They lined us up. We had to be in a straight line, and then we took our oath, raised our hand, and took our oath as a serviceman for the Army. And then they said, after we had our oath, they said, lower your hands, take one step forward. So as a line, we all took one step forward, and we were then in the military.
Mhm.
We were then in the Army. So,
And now that you're in, what did they do with you?
well, now that we were in, that evening, they loaded us on a train and in Detroit. And again, the train itself was sleeper cars because we had to spend the night. And it was pretty dilapidated as well. And it was noisy. And they gave us I think the last couple cars on the train, the overnight cars. So we slept, or tried to sleep, on the train going down to Lexington, Kentucky is where our destination was for eventually to go to Fort Knox. So the morning we got up, they said everybody shave and get ready to get off the train in Fort Knox. Oh, we did stop in Cincinnati. They brought some food on board, and we stopped at the big train station in downtown Cincinnati. And it's a big round building. I don't know if it's still, I think it's still there, but I don't think it's a train station anymore. But it was interesting. The tracks were not in good shape, and the bathroom that we had was kind of like a single stall. It had a metal floor in the bathroom. So you filled the sink when you're going on a straightaway down the tracks. You fill the sink with soapy water so you could get washed down a little bit. And as soon as the train hit a curve, all that water splashed out of the sink onto that metal floor, and it was like an ice skating rink in there. And guys were laughing and falling all over the place, and you know, nobody got hurt, but it was kind of hilarious, really. I mean, it was, you know, unbelievable. So then they offloaded us the next day in Fort Knox, or in Louisville.
Yeah, Louisville.
So then we got on buses again, and they took us from there to Fort Knox.
Okay. Was it Louisville or Lexington?
Lexington,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, there you go.
Lexington. Yeah, it was Lexington.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, buses to Fort Knox. And what kind of reception do you get at Fort Knox?
Well, I can't really remember. I remember we were getting off. We had to line up, and there were a few gawkers there looking at us, you know, laughing at us. You know, here comes another group.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of a thing. But they were having such a build-up at Fort Knox at that time that the first thing they told us, they said, you probably won't be staying here long. They said, well, where are we going to go? This is where we have basic training.
Mm-hmm.
No, they got other plans for some of you. So we went and had something to eat. Then they issued us our clothing. We had the long lines to issue us our clothing, including our underwear and our fatigues and all our boots, 2 pairs of black leather boots and the whole works. And then we went and slept in a barracks for one night. And then the next morning, they took us out and they lined us up again in 3 lines. And these were a lot of my friends. We were still as a group. A lot of my friends from Bay City, kids I went to school with, kids I knew, guys I knew, were with us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be pretty cool. We're going to be going through basic training together and all that kind of thing. Well, the Army had other plans. And I kind of think they maybe did it on purpose a little bit. So anyway, they lined us up and they count off 1, 2, 3. So we started the front line, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Second line, the same thing. Third line, same thing. So we were essentially breaking us down into 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, number 1 is staying here at Fort Knox for basic training. Number 2 is going to Fort Carson in Colorado for basic training, which was a pretty nice place to go. And number 3 was going to Fort Hood, Texas for basic training. I was number 3.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I had a couple of friends that went with me down to Fort Hood, but I think we spent a day or 2 in Fort Knox, just getting, you know, indoctrinated and, you know, told what was going to happen and what we were going to be doing. And then they took us to the airport, and they flew us to Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
Texas. And from there, we took buses down to Fort Hood. So again, it's all kind of a blur right now.
Right.
That's been a few years ago.
Okay. And so where in Texas is Fort Hood?
Killeen. The city is Killeen. It's not too far from Waco.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of
So it's West Texas.
southern central of the,
Yeah.
you know, south of Dallas,
Mhm.
central Texas.
Okay.
So right off of one of the main highways. So Fort Hood at that time was the headquarters of the 1st Armored Division, the 1st AD. And so they brought us in. We went into our barracks. We unpacked. They gave us foot lockers and bunks. And the first thing they did was showed us how to make our bed. And they would be inspecting that bed every morning to make sure it was done right. And the blankets were tight enough that you could bounce a quarter on, you know, and all that stuff. So we had, one thing I remember, I was smoking cigarettes at that point, and one thing I remember is the butt cans, what we had on the posts in the barracks, half filled with water. That's where you threw your cigarettes in when you were done smoking them. So, but yeah, I never thought about cigarette smoke, you know, at that point in time. Everybody smoked.
Yeah, it was a little bit before the Surgeon General's report came out on it.
Interesting. That was an interesting time. We were issued M14 rifles, the old M14s that had been around for forever. We were instructed on how to take them apart and clean them, and we were timed. Once they were apart, we were timed on how quickly we could get them back together again. And if you didn't do it in a certain time, you did it until you got a certain time done.
Now, did you have any experience with guns before you got there?
Yeah, our family were hunters, and my brother would take me deer hunting and that type of thing. So I was familiar with rifles. I would go pheasant hunting, so I was familiar with shotguns.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but not to the degree that we did there. Then you had a choice. You could qualify with the rifle, the M14, or you could qualify with a .45 pistol, the 1911 pistol. So we were issued pistols in case we wanted to qualify with
Mm-hmm.
that. But these pistols, you know, I didn't know anything about pistols, but I could tell these pistols were well used. And a lot of the guys, me included, you could stand 5 meters, 15 feet from a target and never hit it
Mm-hmm.
with these .45s. So we thought, no, I don't think we want to qualify with a
Mm-hmm.
.45. So later on, when I became a medic, the medics could carry the .45 if they wanted to. So, but I carried the M16. So, but anyway.
All right. Now, one of the standard things about basic training is the assumption that you get yelled at and treated rather badly.
Oh, yeah.
Did that happen with you?
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much so. They would. We had one guy that was unfortunate for him. I think they let him go but he was a bedwetter,
Mm-hmm.
and they got on him big time. You know, and it wasn't his fault.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a medical.
Yeah.
It was a medical condition. You know, how did you get this far and all this stuff? You know, they railed on him big time, and all of a sudden he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
I think they took him out of the service.
Okay.
But
Now, did they get physically abusive or just yell at you and make you do weird jobs?
well, they would. The only physical abuse that we got was if they didn't like what you were doing, you had to drop and give them 10 or 20 push-ups.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was the physical abuse. There was no hitting. There was none of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it was intimidating enough, and you know, if the infraction was serious enough, rules-wise, you know, you had to do 50 push-ups.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we PT, physical training on the field was interesting. We had a PT instructor that stood on a platform, and we all lined up out there, and we did PT every day. At Fort Hood, it was out in the boonies a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and there was an artillery battery there as well, and we would go out in the field, and 2 fields over they would be shooting live artillery, you know. So that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, big howitzers were firing, and so we went out on many bivouacs overnight, and the last bivouac, I think basic training was 8 weeks, I believe.
Yeah, that was standard at that point.
Yeah, 8 weeks. Well, the first few weeks, of course they cut your hair off, you know, which is not a big
Mhm.
deal. And you had to get used to, in the barracks, there were no stall partitions. You had to get used to sitting, you know, with everybody around you,
Mhm.
you know, and the same thing with the showers were wide open. So you got used to that. But I lost my train of thought. Anyway, we would go out on these bivouacs. You know, we would march out, and the final bivouac was, I think it was a 5-mile march out with packs and rifles, marching and running part of the time, and then you would spend the night, 2 nights or 3 nights in the field. You would do more things in the field, more training, and then you would come back. The night before, I was having some tooth problems. I had a molar that was bad. So the night before we went on this big march, they got me into the dentist. And that's an interesting experience too for the military dentist. They got me into the dentist chair, and I had to have the tooth extracted, the molar. And apparently I had an unusual tooth that had 2 straight roots and one that was on a curve. You know, so they numbed me up as best they could, and they got in there and with pliers, and they started pulling, and it went snap.
Oh.
It snapped. One of the roots broke off. And the dentist said, "Uh-oh," and I was gone. I never fainted in my life, but I was gone. So next thing I know, they're smelling salts under my nose, and I'm waking up, and they said, "Well, we got the root out, you know, while you were sleeping." I said, "Okay, that's good." And they sewed me up, and then they said, "Well, you can't march tomorrow." So I was lucky. I was taken out by truck to where the other guys were, and of course they gave me a hard time. And then that night they just had issued us brand new, beautiful, olive drab colored sleeping bags, down-filled, first class stuff all the way. And I woke up that next morning, and that whole top of that sleeping bag was blood. The tooth had things. I'll just flip it over and do it go from the other side. So anyway, I cleaned it up as best I could. But we did go home. Was in basic training for, I guess maybe 6 weeks. Christmas came.
Yeah.
And our hair was starting to grow out, and they said you could go home on leave for a week at Christmas. Our hair was starting to grow out. We thought, oh, this would be good, you know. So the night before we were to go on leave, the sergeant said, "Got a surprise for you guys. We're taking you all to the barber tomorrow." So that morning we had to get shaved again. Our whole head got shaved again. So needless to say, I wore a hat for 2 weeks when I was home on leave for Christmas. But then we had to go back to Fort Hood, and then finish our basic training, you know, in Fort Hood. So.
Okay. So then, once you get to the end of that, then what happens to you?
Okay. Well, during all this period, there is an aptitude test that they gave you a couple times, and they scored you a certain aptitude, and I guess I scored maybe a high enough aptitude that I qualified to be a medic, medical training. Some were qualified for mechanics, some were qualified for just straight leg infantry, you know, and that type of thing. So I think I was chosen, or not chosen, but I was told I could go on AIT, Advanced Individual Training, down to Fort Sam Houston in San Antone. So to be a medical corpsman down in San Antone.
Did you have the option to say no and just be in the infantry?
No.
Okay.
No, I thought this was a good deal. You know, in fact, my brother was older than I was, with 10 years, and he was in the Army, and he went to Korea, but the war wasn't on.
Right.
In the late 50s, he was in Korea, and they made him a medic as well. So he was a medic as well in Korea for a year. And my sister, again, she's older than I am, but she's an RN. She was never in the military, but she was a registered nurse. So it was kind of, you know, unusual that all of us in the family, all the siblings in the family, would become in the medical area. So Fort Sam was a great place. It was 10 weeks of training. We had an upscaled barracks that we stayed in, and they even had a swimming pool there you could go to. We didn't go to there right away, but it was interesting because the waifs, the women Air Force, or the women whatever it was, the Women Army, whatever,
Yeah.
Army Corps. They had their basic training at Fort Sam,
Mm-hmm.
and we would be, we would be marching out there or going to our classes and stuff like that, and there would be, these women marching by, and they would be going through their routines and all that stuff, and it was, we of course we gave them a hard time from the sidelines, but so it was pretty intense training down there at Fort Sam, and we even went to a point where we had movies of taking care of patients and stuff like that, and we had a movie on baby delivering a baby. So it was probably a half an hour film on delivering a baby, what to look for and what not to look for. So little did I know that would come and help later on. But anyway, we were there, and I think it was after 5 weeks of the 10 weeks, we could then go out to the surrounding area, leave the compound, leave the base. It was an open base. It was a beautiful fort, and they had a polo field in the middle, and at one end was the Brooke Army Hospital, which was the burn center for the military. That wasn't very pleasant to visit there, but you never get that smell out of your nostrils when you went into that hospital, and we had to go in there and look at some of the burn patients, and like I say, you never get that odor out of your nostrils. I can almost still smell it today, of those poor guys. But it was good training. It was.
How much of it was geared toward specifically combat stuff?
Well, a lot of it was not very much emergency stuff, but most of it was geared to hospital care. Taking care of patients in the bed. How do you change sheets when they have a patient in the bed? How do you put a catheter in? How do you take blood? How do you give shots? And that kind of stuff. That was what the majority of the training was. And there was a lot of lectures and a lot of testing. They would give you a lecture, and then 2 days later, you had better take notes because there would be a test. In fact, I still have those documents. I got them out yesterday, and I was looking at them. I think, did I write all this stuff? So, unbelievable. So, yeah, it was good. It was good training. A bunch of us knew we were going back to Fort Hood after the medical training, and had a nice graduation ceremony down there. We all got our certificates, and but again, like you say, it was geared towards hospital training, not necessarily emergency training that we went to. So.
Okay. So then after the 10 weeks, so you go back then to Fort Hood.
Fort Hood.
And did you get assigned to a unit at that point?
Yep. We went to the 1st of the 46th Infantry. It was a mechanized infantry division.
That would have been a battalion.
Or battalion, yeah. Yeah.
Because you were part of the 1st Armored Division at that point.
Yes, and then I wasn't there very long, and we were changed to the 198th Infantry Brigade. So they told us, any training we did then after AIT at Fort Hood, we were in these APCs, the all armored personnel carriers. They took us out, and we'd chase cows more than anything else out there in the fields. We had a good time with that. So, but anyway, yeah, that was. Then they said, no, you're going to be straight leg infantry, and you're going to Vietnam. And this was in probably May or June of 1966. They said, everybody wanted to know when are we going?
Or 67 now.
67, yeah. When are we going? And they said, well, probably in the fall. You'll be deployed to Vietnam. So, okay, so we did training, and the bunch of us medics there in the aid station, we had to give vaccinations and shots, and they used the gun, the air supplied gun, you know, for giving the shots. There was no needles.
Yep.
And first time I got in line to do that, the medics were inside the aid station. They had an open window, and on the window they had boxes of empty insulin, you know, containers. And they would sit there in the aid station and they'd shoot these injection guns, and they'd shoot these boxes off the sill in the aid station. And of course everybody turned white, you know, and you had to be sure, we were instructed and told and trained how to do that. You had to be sure they kept their shoulders still. You know, it was all shoulder, it was no rear end stuff. And a couple guys didn't, they went like that, and it ripped them open. And they had to get sewn up. You know, it was that, you know, that pressure, that air pressure was strong enough that it ripped them right open. So we did that, and then we said, well, they said, some of you medics, we'd like you to get further emergency training. We said, yeah, it's probably a good idea. You know, so they had Darnell Army Hospital on the base at Fort Hood. And so they said, we'll get you in the rotation, and you'll go into the emergency room at Darnell 5 days a week, 12-hour shifts, mostly the graveyard shifts, 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. or 6
p.m. to a.m.
6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Yep.
overnight, and that was very, very enlightening, and we learned a lot.
Now, did they have a lot of business?
Yes, they did, and it was mostly guys were being foolish, of course. They were, one guy I remember once came in, he was driving his motorcycle, got on a freshly asphalted road. He flipped his motorcycle on a freshly asphalted road and rolled into that asphalt, and he had that stuff, he was screaming, he had that stuff embedded in his skin. He was in shorts, in his legs and all that, and the doctor came in, looked at him and says, clean him up. I said, what? He said, clean him up, scrub him up, get him ready to go, getting ready to go to surgery. I said, well, okay. So I started to try to scrub this guy, you know, his arms and stuff, and he was screaming so loud. They finally came in, and they had to put him out to get this embedded asphalt out of his skin. So that was there was also one night there were also dependents on the base, wives and kids of these people that were assigned to Fort Hood. And one night they brought this little boy in. The guy brought him in his arms, and he was blue. You know, I said, well, you know, what happened? Well, he was blowing up a balloon, and the balloon burst, and part of it went down his throat.
Ooh.
So, you know, we were able to get his mouth open, and we just saw a piece of his of the balloon in his throat.
Right.
And we reached in and pulled that out, and it was amazing that as soon as we got that out, his color came back. You know, he started crying, but it was interesting. And then another time, they were doing parachute jumps, and we always had to go out. They took the ambulance from the hospital, always went out to the field where they were landing, and so we went out with them, working in the. In fact, that morning I think it was early morning jump, so we went out at 6 o'clock in the morning, and one of the guys, unfortunately, his chute didn't deploy until about they said about 20 feet off the ground. So he landed on his feet, but he was dead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we had to pick him up and take him back, and that was horrific. That was really bad. So, you know, and then they made us watch autopsies. We had one in particular was a woman they brought in, and she was mustard yellow. Young woman,
Mm-hmm.
had sclerosis of the liver. She died, and when they opened her up, all her internal organs were the color of French's mustard.
Ugh.
You know, so it was a couple guys got a little woozy, you know, in there watching when they went through the process.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was good experience. You know, looking back on it, it was good experience for what we were going to get into
Yeah.
in a few months. So,
All right. And so how long then did you spend at Fort Hood once you were there as a medic?
I was, well, at Fort Hood, I was there after AIT, which was probably in May of '67 till October
Mm-hmm.
of '68.
All right. Well, 67 still.
'67,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry.
Okay. All right. And
Through the summer,
right.
through the hot summer in Texas.
And at this point now, do you get orders for Vietnam?
Yeah, at that point in time, they said, we're going to, you know, normally people were getting orders to Vietnam as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
They said, we're going to take you over as a unit, as the 1st of the 46th Infantry, 198th Infantry Brigade, as a unit. And we said, well, how does that work? So they said, well, we're working out the details right now. Go home for a couple weeks. So we went back home. This was probably in August
Mm-hmm.
of '67. We went home and then came back to Fort Hood, and they had made up their mind what they were going to do at that
Okay.
point.
Now, what was it like to be back home there? You know you're going to go to Vietnam. It's
Yeah.
now the summer of '67, and things have heated up some more.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah, we spent a lot of time watching the news. Yeah, and then the protests were already starting at that point,
mhm.
you know, and in fact, we had to wear, in order to get a military discount on the airlines,
Mhm.
we had to wear our uniforms. So we were a little bit hesitant at that point in time, September of '67 or August, of wearing our uniforms to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
You know, thinking that we may have problems. But it really wasn't an issue. There only one time going down to Texas, coming back from Michigan, from Bay City. I think we landed in Kansas City, and we were kind of like the last ones to board, where they had
Mhm.
open seats.
Yeah.
So they actually took a couple of us military off the airplane in Kansas City to fill it with a paid passenger.
Mhm.
We were a bit upset about that. And one of the, remember one of the guys from American Airlines gave me his card. He felt so guilty, so bad. He gave me his card. He said, you ever have trouble, you know, in another flight, you give them this card, and I guarantee you, you won't have any more problems. So we were concerned that we were going to miss our bus, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to Fort Hood, and we were going to be late. You know, we didn't want to be late. So it worked out well. We got back. Yeah,
Okay.
it was hard to say goodbye
Mm-hmm.
to your parents and my girlfriend at that point. So yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult.
Okay. So, but then they figured out how to get you to Vietnam, and what method did they use?
Okay, they said this is going to be a little unusual. We're going to take you as a brigade. We have 2 merchant marine ships lined up in Oakland, California, and we're going to ship you over the Pacific by merchant marine ship, and it's going to take about 3 weeks. We're going to cross the Pacific for 3 weeks. Yep. And one of the guys raised his hand right away. He says, "Does that count as our time overseas?" You know, he was concerned about the 12-month
Yeah,
the 12-month
yeah.
stay overseas. They said, "Oh yeah, as soon as you clear the international date or the international border outside in the Pacific, your time starts, your overseas time starts." So they loaded us. Hey, we had to get all packed up. We had our big duffel bags, and we had our M16s at that point. We had qualified for our using our M16s, and they packed us up, and they took us to the airport, commercial flights, and I think we filled the airplane, and they took us into Oakland Airport in California. And Oakland Airport at that point in time in 1967 was kind of like, it wasn't a real busy airport. It wasn't well known, but they unloaded us off the plane onto the tarmac. We had to wait under the plane to get our duffel bag, the big long duffel bag, and then we had our rifles, and they lined us up and they marched us through the terminal. I think everybody thought they were being invaded. You know, the looks that we got of the at the airport were interesting. Again, they loaded us onto buses sitting in front of the airport, and we took a short trip to the harbor in Oakland, where they loaded us on 2 ships, and they already had us, you know, names, and they checked us off as we boarded the ship. And then I think we spent 1 night on the ship, and then we shoved off, and they had a band playing and all that stuff. It was kind of interesting. It was kind of nice, you know. So it was exciting to go underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, but the sleeping accommodations and the ship was, like I said, it was a merchant marine cruise ship is actually what it was. It was converted cruise ship. It was called the Upshur, U-P-S-H-U-R, the Upshur, USS, or the U.S. Upshur. So anyway, they had it fitted out for a troop carrier, and we were down in the lower bilges of the ship, and they had us stacked 4 high. And you had barely enough room. I was a lot smaller than I am right now. You know, I was probably only 120, 130 pounds at that point. And you were barely enough room to roll over before you bumped into the guy, you know, above you. So, and we had to sleep with our rifles. They didn't have a safe place to store them. There was no ammunition, but you had to sleep in the bunk with your rifle. You know, so we spent 3 weeks in bed with our rifle.
So it's a good thing you were small.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. And it was warm down there, and a lot of the guys ended up going up on deck to sleep. You know, it was stuffy, smelly. You know, it was all the above.
Okay. Now, I've talked to a lot of people who shipped out of San Francisco, and one of the things that comes into a lot of the stories is once you kind of get out to sea, you start to hit swells coming in, and the sea starts to roll, and everybody gets sick.
Oh yeah.
Did that happen with your guys?
Well, we were in the infantry battalion, and we were the medics. We had a doctor I can't remember his name now. He was with us.
Okay.
So we set up for sick call every morning. There were 1,100 of us on the ship, and we set up for sick call every morning on the ship, and we logged in 700 cases of seasickness. what was very, I mean, the ship, when we first started out, the ship would roll side to side, port to stern, port to
Starboard.
starboard, port to starboard, which was, you know, everybody kind of got used to that. And as the fuel was used up on the ship, they told us it's now going to start going bow to stern. So we had, once it started going bow to stern, we had everybody get sick again. You know, the same thing. There were, on that ship, what do? You had PT, you know, physical training. You ever try to do a push-up on a ship that's going up and down? That's an interesting exercise. And they did give us the Order of the Golden Dragon when we crossed the international date line. They had cranes on board, and they took a couple guys and strapped them in the cranes, and they dipped them in the ocean. You know, that was their initiation to crossing the international date line. So, but we played cards, you know, and then in the morning, I never got seasick, woozy, but never got seasick except one morning when we had these tables that had little ridges on them, and we had metal trays, and the trays would slide back and forth, and you were eating breakfast, and there was a guy scraping trays, and there was a hole there in the counter, and that would go right out of the ship. Well, he would scrape 2 trays, and then he'd throw up into that hole. He would scrape 2 trays and then throw up into that hole, and that kind of got to me. I finally had to turn around and not watch him, you know. But so we stopped. We called it. The ship was called the USS Upshur. Like I said, it was a cruise ship that they used to run cruises from Miami to Cuba. So the interior of the ship, the upper decks were quite nice. You know, they were very, very nice, and that's where the officers stayed, of course, in those bunks, in the officers. About halfway over, 3/4 of the way over, before we got to Taipei or to Taiwan, where we stopped, we ran out of fresh water for showers. Oh man! So I don't know if anybody's ever taken a shower in salt water, but the soap turns to grease, is what it does. The salt water turns the soap to grease. So you went into the shower and you came out feeling dirtier than when you went in. As a medic, we were very lucky. We were complaining to the doctor that was on the ship as an officer. He says, "I'll sneak you up to the officers' quarters." So he snuck us up one at a time, and we were able to use their showers, which was they still had fresh water. So that was one of the perks, I guess, of being a medic on that ship. But we stopped in Taipei, and they refueled. And then we went from Taipei, it wasn't very long after that, to Vietnam.
Right.
You know, so.
Okay. And how do you go ashore in Vietnam, and where do you land?
Okay, they took us off the ship. I can't remember. I think it was Da Nang. No, it was in Vung Tau, which was south, quite a ways south. And we had to climb down the rope ladders on the outside of the ship, and you threw your gear. They brought our gear to us. You know, they'd taken that out of the ship. But they loaded us onto an LST, which is a big, hollow, you know, ship. What is it? Something, whatever, a tank.
Landing ship tank.
Landing ship tank, right. It was a big room that was about 100, seemed like it was 100 yards long by, 50 yards wide by 10 yards high. And as we were going onto that LST, they issued everybody live ammo for the first time for the M16s. I'm thinking, they're going to put all of us in this can, and They're going to give us give all of us live ammo. What's going to happen if somebody lets loose some shells or fires some shells in that LST? But thankfully, nothing happened. It was hot.
Mhm.
It was late September, early October in Vietnam. It was still very warm.
Mhm.
So we ended up in the LST. We didn't sleep inside. We ended up going up on deck and sleeping up on deck. It was hard, but it was at least it was cooler.
Okay.
So
So you're going north along the Vietnamese coast.
yes.
And how long did that trip take, do you think?
I think we were on the ship a couple days.
Mhm.
It took us a while to get up there. We had 2 days and 2 nights on the ship,
Mm-hmm.
and eating sea rations. They didn't have, hot meals on
Right.
board. So we got we had some sea rations, dehydrated food and stuff when we were in basic training
Mhm.
and that. So, but yeah, it was. There were no showers.
Mhm.
Some bathrooms, but no showers, and so they unloaded us as a unit in Da Nang. We came off the LST. They actually rolled it kind of up on shore like they do the tanks,
Mhm.
put the door down, and we walked out as a unit, flags waving and all that stuff. So whatever.
All right. Now, were there media there taking pictures and
I
things?
think so, because there was some pictures that I got from the paper, the newspaper,
Right.
showing the guys coming ashore. So
Okay, so we've now successfully gotten you as far as Da Nang and Vietnam.
Yep.
And at this point, what's your initial impression of Vietnam?
when we were coming up the coast, it was a very beautiful country. It was green. We could see the Central Highlands at one point in the background. The mountains.
Right.
And it was a beautiful country. We didn't see, of course, the interior of the country at that point, and the rice paddies and all that stuff. But it was very green and a lot of military activity going on as we were coming up the coast. I mean, a lot of flights, a lot of airplanes, a lot of helicopters. Didn't hear much shooting
Mhm.
at that point in time, but we came. It was kind of an interesting tour to begin with, I guess I should say. So, yeah.
Okay, and then you land at Da Nang, and then what happens from there?
Okay, in Da Nang, we were offloaded off the LSTs, and then they took us on. I think we didn't have buses. I think they put us in the big trucks, the deuce and a halfs with the canvas covers,
Right.
and we were loaded in there with our gear, and we went to a chulai,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of was like a holding area, maybe something near the airport there at Chulai.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent a couple nights there. I don't think they quite knew what they were going to do with all of us, and they were still building. There were 2 hills there. They said some of you are going to be on Hill 54, some of you are going to be on Hill 69. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that the highest part of that hill was 54 meters high or 69 meters
Right.
high. So that was fine. So we ended up, I think the engineers were still building that base on Hill 69, putting the huts up, and doing all that stuff. So we were probably one of the first ones into Hill 69. We had a perimeter. It was a fenced perimeter. We had a manned gate, an armored gate, a guy at the gate, and it was interesting because as you were coming into the hill, there was a little village there, and kind of had been set up there to help the GIs with laundry and and all that kind of stuff. So, which was fine. We were right off of I think it was Route 1, Highway
Yeah.
1 in Vietnam, and lots of traffic. Lots of military, A couple of the guys, they shouldn't have done it, but they did it anyway. They'd be going down in a Jeep down Highway 1, and the Vietnamese had these little three-wheeled carts, you know, and they'd come up next to them and they'd push them, you know, and the carts would almost tip over, and they'd laugh, you know, and they were just being a typical teenager at that point in time. So
Now, before you went to Vietnam, did you get any kind of information or indoctrination about the place or the people or how to behave?
yeah, we had all those lectures and all those briefings when we were at Fort Hood before we we left, and you know, they told us, I think they had some ex people that had been there come in and talk to us and told us, you know, what to expect. You know, they didn't know where we were going to be or what we were going to do at that point in time, but if you were going to do this, this is what you were going to expect. You know, expect that if you're infantry, you're going to be out in the field. You know, they indicated like 100% of the time, you know, which the guys were really concerned about that. But yeah, they gave us, you know, politically what was happening over there, who was in charge politically, and what the communists were planning to do that we knew or tried to know what they were trying to do, and who the leaders were, and not that we were in that area, but but you know, they were pretty good about giving us, indoctrinated us as to what was going on over there. So
Okay. And did they tell you things about how to treat the civilians or anything like that?
oh yeah, of course they did. I mean, you have a military code of conduct, and that's applies to all servicemen. You know, that to have respect for the people and the civilians, and respect for your own servicemen. You know, and that code of conduct, they kept drilling that into us. You know, and I think it stuck. You know, in fact, it still sticks today. You know, they drilled that into us. You know, that thoroughly. So.
Okay. Now, you'd gotten as far as Chu Lai, and that's a place near the coast that has been described to me. It's got a very sandy and flat.
Yeah, it was sandy and flat. They had a very large. There was an Air Force base there, and we had. There was a very large PX there, which had everything in it. It was very, very nice. It's very, very large. In fact, when I was there at Chu Lai at the PX, I bought a movie camera, a Super 8 movie camera. And the guy said, "What are you going to do with that?" I said, "I'm going to take some pictures when I can." You know, so it ended up, the movie camera that I bought, the Kodak Super 8, fit perfectly in an ammo pouch, you know, on my waist. So I got an extra ammo pouch, and I tried to take that movie camera whenever I could out in the field. I didn't take it so much during the monsoon season, but yeah, the area was very nice. I mean, you had the beach, you know, you could go swimming on the sandy beach, and the waves were very tough. We tried to do a lot of body surfing at that point in time. We didn't have surfboards, but we tried to do body surfing in the salt water. But yeah, it was Chu Lai was quite nice. And you had the backdrop was the Central Highlands behind it. So.
Okay. I guess I've been told, I guess at least in the summer or whatever, it got very hot though, didn't it? The sand got very hot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But you're there because you're coming in at least toward the end of the year at this
Right,
point.
we're
So you're
coming in the
based on Hill 69 at this point.
Yep.
Now, are you assigned specifically to a company, or are you with battalion headquarters, or?
Yeah, I was in headquarters company because I was a medic, and we had the aid station. We had the aid station there, so I was in headquarters company. So.
Okay. Now, did you stay in the aid station, or would you go out with in the
No.
field with the line units?
I was with Company E when I went out in the field. That was my assignment. And Company E was a mortar battalion. And we were usually, because the guys carried these 81 millimeter mortars, very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
They had one guy carried the base, one guy carried the tube, and a bunch of guys carried the ammo.
Right.
We were usually the last ones to go into the LZs.
Mm-hmm.
So all the other companies went in first into an LZ on a helicopter, and then they brought the mortar platoon, which is us, in there. So we had a lot of training with mortars there off of Hill 69. They had an area where it was uninhabited. We would train for the mortars to go off, and the guys used to like. I used to go up and watch them, and they'd always like the medic to drop the 81 millimeter mortar in the tube, and and I think that's probably that, and the laws, the light anti-tank weapon, like a small bazooka.
Right.
I think that's where I lost my hearing. I have 2 hearing aids, but that's where I started to lose my hearing for those exercises. Because you never wore headphones, you never put earplugs in. I mean, we had them, but nobody used them, so, but.
Okay. Now, on Hill 69, were you in tents? Were you in kind of cabin things?
Yeah, we were on Hill 69, they had an assortment. They had officers' quarters, which were corrugated metal, and wood framed buildings. And then we had a church there down in the gully. And that was, again, plywood and corrugated metal. And the huts that we stayed in, the aid station was corrugated roof and wood sides. The huts that we stayed in had screens on the sides. I think they had a metal roof and then a wooden floor, that we stayed in. The huts that we stayed in, the bunks that we stayed in, they all had mosquito netting, in the so to keep the mosquitoes at bay. So, and then just down from us at the aid station up on top of the hill, there was the mess hall and the cook's barracks there. And then we had bunkers all around Hill 69 where guys would go for guard duty. Barbed wire and then bunkers, barbed wire and bunkers, all the way around. So.
All right. Now, was this a battalion-sized base or company-sized, or?
I think it was company-sized base. It wasn't the whole battalion.
So a lot of time, the companies would be out in the field, and they would maybe rotate in and out.
Yeah.
Okay. But you went out in the field with companies at different times yourself.
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe the first time going out in the field?
Yeah, the first time they took us out, we walked from Hill 69. Would be probably going west towards the Central Highlands. And they purposely took us, into some very wet areas, rice paddy areas that we had to go through and all that. And that was, that was a very enlightening experience as to what you were going to be going through. And then before that, as a medic, we had to make sure everybody in our company or whatever, they had malaria pills. And malaria was very prevalent over there. And so we had to make sure that they had malaria pills. And then the first thing you learn over there is once you go through a rice paddy, your boots and your shoes and your socks are wet. What do you do with that? You slog through the day, and then you better have a second pair of socks at night. So you try to rinse them out with water, and then the only way to dry them, you stuff them inside your shirt where it's warm, and you sleep, and hopefully the next morning your socks are fairly dry, but they're drier than the ones that you took off. So, but
Now, when you went through those places, would you get leeches too, or was that somewhere else?
yes, very much so. Not so much in the lowlands, the leeches. We had a lot of guys. Were scared to death of leeches, you know, and but the lowlands was mostly the rice paddies, and you tried to go up on the berms, you know, for the rice paddies and walk along, and you go through villages, and of course the kids would come up to you, and the words they knew was "gimme gum." That's what they wanted, you know, or "gimme candy," "gimme gum," you know. So the first couple times we didn't run into any trouble, you know. I wasn't there too long, and one night we heard some shooting off the hill towards the Central Highlands, and it was my first experience to see illumination rounds overhead. You know, we launched illumination rounds from our hill out, you know, phosphorus rounds, and it was amazing how much that lighted everything up. So, and at that point in time, the starlight scopes was just coming into play. Some of the infantry guys, they were very expensive at that point. Somebody said they were like $4,000 a piece for these starlight scopes. But you look through them at night, and what it does, it magnifies the starlight or the, you know, or the moonlight, and everything has a green cast to it, a green. So it's quite interesting to see. So.
Now, by way of weaponry, is your unit equipped with M16s at this point?
Yeah, we had M16s. I was equipped with an M16. I could have carried a 45, but I didn't want to carry a 45. So, how many times I used the M16 to fire when we were in firefights? Not very often. I was kind of sitting back, waiting if somebody got hurt. You know, so a couple times I did. You know, you fire into the jungle, you don't know what you're hitting. You know, but so it was. Then we had the automatic machine guns. We had one guy was a machine gunner, and what I always was amazed at is these guys walking point. You know, they were the head of the column. You know, walking point, and they rotated. You know, not the same guy all the time, but they rotated. So yeah, it was something to watch those guys, how careful they were. You know, not only were they stepped, but looking and watching. You know, they had all those people behind them. They were point. They were the ones responsible.
Okay.
So.
Now, you had mentioned before that you're assigned, at least initially, to the mortar company, and they wouldn't be up front. But within each company, though, did you have your own point people?
Yeah, we had our own. We had our own rifle. We had our own machine gunner, and we still walked in the column, even though we weren't the first ones to go down. But we were there, and we were usually in the back, and the point guy would give us a grid or whatever, you know, or somebody would give us a grid of where to shoot in, and then later on in the year we got paired up with an FO, forward observer, and his radio man out of the Hill 54 was the artillery hill, and I got to know those guys very well. In fact, we shared a tent when we were out in the field, three of us. So they would call in artillery for us. So.
Right. Okay. Now, to kind of go back to the first few months of your tour, before the Tet Offensive starts in early '68,
Right.
What were those first few months like?
Well, we were very apprehensive. You know, we didn't know what to expect. You know, you thought as soon as you left the hill that you would be shot at. You would be, they had mortars too. You would be mortared or whatever. But it was very rare at the first couple months. off the hill. But then when we started, maybe we were there a month after we'd done a couple walking patrols through villages and stuff like that, searching and clearing the villages, making sure there were no weapons in there and all of that. People weren't real happy with us coming into their huts, you know, and you know, we did some, they knew we were a medic, you know. We did some civic action there as a medic to try to help some local people, you know, try to get on their side, try to show them that we're here to help them, not to hurt them as far as the villagers were concerned. But you never knew. They were concealed very well. The VC, the Viet Cong, were very well concealed, and you were very skeptical about any young man there. That was he a VC or was he just a, you know, was he just a regular villager? You know, you didn't, or a farmer, you didn't know.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Now, you initially were walking out, but then you would start to go out on combat assaults. You go out in helicopters.
Right, right. I think once they figured we were used to what the thing was like out there, what the situation was like, they started bringing helicopters in, and we had to go out on combat assaults. I think I counted 13 combat assaults that I went out on, and most of the LZs, the landing zones that we were into, were hot LZs. That meaning they were shooting. There was some. That's the reason we were there, is we were going out to try to take care of that. And we would go in with the helicopters with the Hueys, and the door gunners would be firing the whole time until we got well off the Hueys into cover. So then we would go, usually landed in like a rice paddy or something like that, someplace where they could get the helicopter in. Then you went into the jungle from there. So, yeah.
All right. And now, as the medic, I mean, how much of a pack did you carry?
I carried my it was probably about all my bandages and all the stuff I carried. It was probably a package of about, you know, maybe 16 inches long by 12 inches high by 12 inches wide, and pretty heavy. Plus you had your normal pack on your back, and it was the whole thing. Somebody said the whole thing weighed about 70 pounds. So you, with your rucksack and all your gear and your water bottles and your ammunition and the medic stuff. So they said you can, as a medic, you can wear a Red Cross armband on your arm if you want in the field. And he said, no, that's just a target.
Yeah.
And we figured that was just a target for the enemy. And so I also carried, as a medic, I carried morphine, and we were drilled into our head that we had to guard that morphine, keep it on our bodies at all time, because guys will be guys and they will try to get high, you know, with morphine. So that's the other area of Vietnam, which is marijuana. Marijuana was very prevalent over there. You could go into a village and they would be sitting outside their huts and they would be selling marijuana. And you could buy a pound of marijuana for $16. And which the guys were pretty good about not smoking that when they were out on patrol or out in the field. But going back to base camp, you know, it was a different story. You walk around the base camp at night and you can smell it big time. What happened later on in the tour, the VC, the Viet Cong, started lacing the marijuana with heroin.
Mm.
And they wanted to get the guys addicted. And then they pretty much, the Army pretty much shut all that down. I mean, if you smoked marijuana, it was almost a crime.
Mhm.
You know, it was a felony. So, yeah, so that was interesting stuff.
Did that policy have any effect?
It did. Yeah, it stopped probably 70% of it.
Mm.
You know, but there's still guys that still wanted to do that. I tried it.
Mhm.
You know, we all tried it. You know, and it didn't do anything for me. So I'd still rather have a can of beer. You know.
All right. Now, how long was it before you had any combat casualties to treat?
Initially, probably within the first month, we were on patrol, and we were walking in single column along a hedgerow, and the sergeant told us, walk down the end of the hedgerow, come around and come back up the other side. So the guys are looking at that, you know, some of the guys said, we're not going to walk that extra block down to the edge of the hedgerow. So let's cut through the hedgerow right here. That looks like there's an opening. And yeah, they had booby trapped it. Or they had put booby traps, explosive booby traps, or they would put false ground with holes with punji sticks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know what a punji stick is. It's sharpened bamboo, dipped in feces, you know. So that would cut through the combat boots over there were canvas on the sides. They had steel bottoms, but they were canvas on the sides. But the punji sticks were designed to go into the upper ankle and lower leg, you know. And so that was, once they got into that, they weren't necessarily, we lost a couple that were blown up when they tried to cut across these hedgerows.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had to bring medevacs in, and you had to surround the area to make sure that the medevacs wouldn't get shot at. But yeah, we had a few guys like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we lost. I think as far as the battalion goes, we had 25 medics that went over there. 5 of us came back unhurt. There was a few killed over there, killed in action, and then there was a lot of them were wounded.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them got sick. I mean, dysentery and that type of thing over there was very prevalent. You know, there was no sanitation.
Mm-hmm.
On Hill 69, I could go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Visualize no bathrooms on Hill 69, outhouses, and urinals were round rocket tubes. They'd taken off the helicopters, buried in the ground, and so that was your urinal. And the outhouses were outhouses, and no plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
So what we had to do was we had to set up, we took 55-gallon drums. We put them in the outhouses, and that's where you went into, you sat down, you went into a 55-gallon drum. What do you do with that? There's no plumbing. So every day or two, we would pull those drums out, and the medics were in charge of seeing that this was done properly. We would pull those 55-gallon drums out from behind the outhouse, throw kerosene in there, and then newspaper and light it and burn the stuff until it was ashes. Then you'd move them back in, and then you'd start again.
And did
So-
you have a sense of smell left after that?
Yeah, well, you tried to stay downwind or away from the
Yep.
wind blowing and that stuff. But what happened was during the monsoon season, which was winter months, those things filled up with water, and they wouldn't burn.
Mm.
So then you had to bury the stuff. You had to go out there with shovels and try to bury the stuff. And it was not, that was probably, the guys said that was probably the worst duty that they could ever have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, was taking care of the crap, you know.
Now, did you let any of the Vietnamese onto the base, or did they have to stay outside?
Yeah, no, they had some workers there in the mess halls and that type of thing. So serving, you know, meals and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, there was, yeah, and they were vetted, you know, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
They were vetted, you know, before they came in. And, you know, they would line up every morning at the gate. You could see them out there on the gate, and they would come in and work. And they were paid,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they were paid. And a couple of them, I think, worked in the, a couple of them worked in the motor pool there that we had, you know, mechanics and stuff like that. So, yeah. So,
Okay. All right. Now, I think one of the incidents that came up, and I think was this in December, there was a point where you got to put your obstetric training into use.
Yeah.
When was that?
Okay, in December we had gone out on a combat assault, quite a ways out, on the foothills of the Central Highlands, near a river. And one morning we were walking along, and along the river it came into a small village, and a couple people ran up to us and, "Mama-san having baby, Mama-san having baby." I said, "Okay." So they called me Doc. They said, "Doc, go take a look. What's going on?" So I go and take a look in the hut, and this woman is in labor,
Mm-hmm.
big time. She was in labor, and, you know, I'm thinking, oh, why didn't we carry gloves?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were concerned about diseases. Why didn't we carry gloves? You know, so I had, they have, what do they call it? The real sharp edged bushes, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in the field. And of course you get pushing through that, you get cut
Yeah.
on your fingers. So I'm standing there going to help this woman, so I'm putting Band-Aids on my cuts on my fingers. So, you know, what do you do? So now I'm thinking, one thing they told us, this movie that we saw in Fort Sam, if you see feet, you know, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but you know, I got her set, got her laid down, and saw the top of the head. You know, and the guys were all on the outside of the hut, and the villagers were all around the hut watching what was going on. And this woman, she was going through pains, you know, and she never uttered a sound. It was just amazing to me that they could hold that in. And then all of a sudden we were getting fire, sniper fire from across the river. So that scattered everybody, and our guys started shooting back. And of course then I had two worries. I had the woman giving birth. Then I'm thinking, what happens if somebody gets hurt or wounded, and or other villagers get wounded?
Yeah.
But fortunately, none of that. Nobody got wounded. Nobody got hurt from their sniper fire. We actually ended up bringing. The baby was born to the sound of artillery shells coming in across the river.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from our FO ordered artillery in to the where they thought the VC were, but of course they were. Once the shooting stopped, they were long gone. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, it was an exciting time. Then we had the afterbirth, of course, and they said, you know, the captain came up to me. Captain Wolf says, "What are we going to do with her?" I said, "Well, we're going to take her to a hospital. You know, it's the only thing we can do." So I said, "Is it safe to bring a medevac in at this point?" He said, "Yeah, we haven't had any shooting for a while." So he said, "We'll bring a medevac in." So they brought, it was a baby boy, by the way, came out good.
Mm-hmm.
And I tied off the umbilical cord like they told me to and cut it. And, they took her, the medevac arrived, they put her on a stretcher, and they put her on the helicopter, and they took her into Chulai Hospital, to be checked out. So they were, some of the villagers were a little concerned, like I said, you mentioned earlier, that she wouldn't be coming back, but we tried to, usually had an ARVN, Republic of Vietnamese interpreter with us, so he was able to tell the villagers, no, she's just going into the hospital, she's going to be cleaned up and taken care of, make sure she's all right, then she'll be brought out, she'll be brought back out here. So a few days later, I inquired, and they that's what they had done. It was a healthy baby boy, quite an experience. And then after that, I didn't realize it at the time, but our captain put me in for a Bronze Star Award, Valorous Award, for that exercise, so that experience.
All right. Now, before the Tet Offensive started, did your unit get into any large-scale firefights?
It was pretty quiet. I think I delivered the baby on the 19th of December, just before Christmas. After that, when we went in to base camp, the Bob Hope show was there. And a couple of us were able to go to see Bob Hope and Raquel Welch. That was quite an experience, just before Christmas in July. And then after that, through Christmas and the New Year, our New Year, it was pretty quiet. It was not much fighting going on. Little probably did we know that this was the time during the big buildup of the ARVN, or the North Vietnamese, the NVA coming down. And so that was through January. We went on a lot of patrols, but there was sporadic firefights, but nothing real major, at all. So January 30th was their Tet New Year, their New Year, and we went out in the field at the base of the Central Highlands, camping overnight, bivouacking overnight, and the guys were on guard duty and that type of thing, and all of a sudden we get a report from headquarters that there were 1,000 NVA troops within 2 miles of our location. So we didn't go, it was the middle of the night, we didn't go out after them. We launched, as a mortar platoon, we launched a lot of illumination rounds to see if we could see any movement out there. But we didn't. About 4 o'clock in the morning or so, still dark, all of a sudden we hear whoosh. Out of the Central Highlands, the NVA were launching rockets into Chulai, into the air base. They were aiming for the hospital. They were aiming for whatever they could do. So the next morning, we watched these rockets go off from the Central Highlands, maybe halfway up the mountain. And it was a frightening experience. We didn't know if these 1,000 NVA was in our area or whatever.
Right.
So.
Now, were you with a company-sized unit at that point? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a company-sized unit. So they took us. They brought helicopters and gunships in the morning. They picked us up, and they said, "You're going up into the Central Highlands where the rockets came from." Okay, so we loaded into the helicopters, and they took us up into the Central Highlands. Well, the problem was the helicopters could not land on the side of a mountain.
Yep.
So the NVA had cleared out an area where they had the rockets launched, and of course they were gone. The NVA were gone. They weren't there anymore. So we tried as best we could. The helicopter pilots tried as best they could with their propellers to get us as low as they could onto the side of that mountain. Then we had to jump out of the helicopter. And most of the guys, a couple sprained ankles, most of the guys did fine. You know, one guy was sitting, you can imagine, he was sitting on the edge of the helicopter floor, and there's the strut down there, and he had his feet on the strut. Instead of standing up and jumping, he just kind of slithered off the helicopter floor, and his rucksack got caught on the strut where the helicopter lands. So he hung there for a few minutes, and then he got free. Then he flipped 180 degrees and landed on his rucksack on his back on the side of the mountain. So I went over to see him. He had the wind knocked out of him, but he was okay. Thank goodness he didn't have to. We didn't have to evacuate him out. So, but yeah, so we stayed up there. We did patrols from that area for a few days. One time it had cleared out. It got pretty quiet for a while right there. One day we had a patrol going out to try to find some fresh water in the streams up there in the mountains. So one of the guys, I think it was a radio man or somebody that wasn't really infantry trained, wanted to walk point. So 6 of us went down this trail, and he was walking point. And all of a sudden, I look up and he's running back. You know, let's get out of here, get out of here. So what's going on? He says, I just ran into a column of NVA coming the other way on the trail. Both point men saw each other, they turned around and they ran in both directions. So when we got back, shaking a little scared, back to the group, they sent a column out to try to look for these NVA on the same trail, but of course nobody found anything. So yeah, Tet Offensive was an interesting time. They blew up a bridge in Chulai on Highway 1, and it was funny because later on they brought in a crane to repair that bridge, and on the back of that crane was Bay City. You know, that was where I was from in Michigan. The government had purchased from Industrial Braunhoist that crane, and they had shipped it over to Vietnam, and they were using that to repair that bridge. But yeah, it was a very tense time. Lots of firefights, lots of guys injured, lots of guys hurt. You know, we had a lot of casualties in our unit. You know, but I took a note yesterday of a book that I had about how many injuries they had during Tet, and this is the U.S. forces. In the first 30 days of Tet, okay, that would have been the whole month, probably the month of February, 1968. The U.S. Killed in action 2,371, wounded 11,664. Of those wounded, 5,500 were returned to duty in country, and 155 missing in action. The NVA counted 25,000 killed in action, and 16,000 lost weapons. There was no stats on the wounded that they encountered. So, yep.
Yeah. All right. Now, somewhere along the line, you picked up another Bronze Star.
Yes. That was we went after I was in the field through Tet, and after I was in the field for 6 months. They like to rotate the medics back into the aid station, and then send new medics or send other medics out and take their place with the companies in the fields. So I was one of the lucky ones. I was rotated back to the aid station, and then I believe it was in June or July of '68, the Tet thing had calmed down, but the Laos thing had gotten pretty hot. There were lots of stuff going on in Laos across the border from
We
Vietnam.
weren't doing officially too much there, but we were doing, there was a lot of fighting going on farther up in the highlands and in the hills and close to the Laotian border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were told, our group, our battalion was told, you're going to Laos. You're going to deploy to Laos for at least 30 days. Oh, man. And that scared the heck out of us, you know, to go into a green site, you know, and they said you need to have, you know, your weapons, you need to have, you know, food, you need to have medical supplies. Well, I was in the pharmacy at that point, and the government had put out lists of what they required for a battalion moving to a new site. And you had to have bins full of bandages and medicine and, you know, shots and all this stuff that we sutures and all this stuff that we had to use over there. And I did an inventory in our pharmacy, and we had a quarter of what we needed. So the doctor said, "Do you think you can pull this together?" I said, "Well, give me a driver and give me a Jeep, and I'll see what I can find." So I spent 3 weeks scouring the countryside, Chu Lai, the hospital, other hills, Hill 54, our hill, other military bases there. I think I even went to the Air Force, you know, on the airport, and was able to pull together, I would say, 98% of the necessary supplies that we had to take into Laos. So we got that all inspected, got that all, you know, quantified, and and then of course, a week later or 2 weeks later, your trip's canceled. But what the doctor wanted to do, or what he said, you went over and beyond your duty to pull all this together. So they gave me a second Bronze Star for meritorious service. So.
All right. So what was life like then on the base now that you're working at the aid station? What kinds of things were you doing?
Well, we had, of course, you had the little villages down the Chu Lai, and guys would go down there and have a good time. And of course, they'd come back with VD. So we had a pretty healthy supply of penicillin on hand. And then if guys couldn't take penicillin, they had antibiotics like tetracycline and that type of thing that we used to, and we had the aid station was open for cuts and bruises and, you know, minor wounds and taking sutures out and, you know, and all that kind of thing. So that's what we did on a day-to-day basis. We inspected, another silly story, but we inspected our job was to inspect all the latrines on Hill 69. There were probably, I'm guessing there were probably a dozen or six to 12 latrines. And some of the guys that we had on duty for the inspection and cleaning these latrines, the medics were just overseers. We didn't actually had to do this. We had to make sure they burned the stuff and all that. And then one time, one of the medics got a hold of some methyl salicylate. I don't know if you know what that is. You ever smell wintergreen?
Yeah.
That's the wintergreen oil.
Okay.
And that's what you put on, you know, swellings, and that the heat makes it heat, makes it warm, and it reduces swelling and all that stuff. Well, one of the medics thought it would be funny if we sprinkled some of that on the officers' latrine seats. And we got in big time trouble for that. You know, they came right at us. You know, wanted to know who it was. Well, of course we didn't know who did it, and of course whoever did it didn't didn't volunteer that they did it. So we got a severe reprimand that this would not happen again. You know, but that was funny.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Now-
that was life on the hill, you know.
Now, when the units out in the field took casualties, would they come to your aid station, or would they get taken to July or somewhere else?
We had a helicopter pad right there. If they weren't too serious, you know, injuries, cuts, and or whatever, they would land there. Then we would go up, you know, kind of like they see on MASH. We would go up and with a Jeep, and then bring them back to the aid station, evaluate them, and if they needed to go further from there, we would take them by ambulance or by Jeep from there into the Chulai Hospital, you know, just down the road from us. So, yep.
All right. And then you also did some work out in the community from there.
Yes, that was a really good thing that we ended up doing later in my tour, probably during the summer, and it was hot. It was really hot. And we did these MedCaps, which is Medical Civic Action Programs, where we would go into a village and we would set up a mini aid station, and we would bring in the people from the village, the kids. If they had any ailments, we would give them medication. Most of them came in with dental problems. A lot of it self-inflicted dental problems. They would chew a narcotic called betel nut, and they would chew that. It turned their gums red, their teeth red, and they would chew that to numb the pain in their mouth from their rotted teeth. You know, especially the older people, the seniors, and of course we couldn't do anything about that. We'd give them aspirin, or we'd give them Tylenol or whatever to try to kill the pain, but I think it helped a lot. And then one time we were in a village, and it was late in the afternoon, and we'd gone through the villagers and helped them, you know, with medication and minor injuries and that type of thing. And the chief of the village came up to us, and we had our interpreter with us. He says, we'd like to give you dinner. We said, okay, we'd like to give us dinner. So we said, yeah, we can do that. We had our Jeeps. It was a drivable thing, you know, where we take our supplies with us. So we stayed for dinner, and the interpreter, I think he was pulling our chain. Maybe he wasn't, but he said, after the dinner, he said, how'd you like the meat? We said, oh, well, that wasn't too bad. We said, well, those were some old dogs in the village that they had left over, and then they decided to cook them up and serve them to you. We said, you know, he was kind of smiling a little bit, but I don't think it was, you know, but they did eat. That was considered a delicacy over there. Dog was considered a delicacy.
All right.
So,
and did your system complain about the meal later?
can't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it probably did, because it was rich food, was highly spiced food, and yeah, it was. We had a couple guys from the Southwest on our base camp, and they planted a garden, and they planted jalapeno peppers, you know, and all the hot peppers, and so they would eat that to spice up their food while they were on the hill. And yeah, they would spend the morning in the latrine the next day, you know, getting rid of that hot food. So.
All right. Now, one of the kind of standard things people in Vietnam was they would get an R&R. They get to go leave the country for a while and go somewhere else. And did you get that, and where did you go?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I had signed up to go to. You sign up for where you want to go. You could go to Thailand, you could go to Bangkok, Thailand, you could go to Japan, you could go to Australia, and you could go to Hawaii. Most of the married guys that were there ended up going to Hawaii, and they flew their wives flew over to meet them in Hawaii.
Right.
So we didn't mess with going to Hawaii. It would have been nice, but we didn't mess with that. So I signed up to go to Australia. And I think it was in April of that year, I was able to go to Australia. They took us by Braniff International Airlines from Da Nang to the north part of Australia. I can't think of the name of it, a city there, to refuel. And while they were refueling, they had to have the plane emptied of soldiers. We all had to get off the airplane. So they took us off. They were concerned about drugs, you know, marijuana and whatever else. They took us off 3 at a time, 3 seats across. They took us off 3 at a time. They had MPs there at the airport, and they searched our seats. They searched us, and then they let us off the airplane. It took quite a while for 160 guys to get off the airplane, and they refueled, and it was a northern tip of Australia.
Like
I can't
Townsville,
think of,
or Townsville, or
No, it
is
was
Darwin, which is in the middle of the country.
Yeah, no, this was at the tip on the I can't.
Yeah,
think.
yeah. I mean, it's closest to kind of to New Guinea sort of thing. But
Yes, right,
yeah,
up
yeah.
way up the top, and then we flew from there to Sydney, Australia. Then they inspected us again. They did the same thing. You know, oh man, you know, this is what it's going to be like. What's it going to be like when we get off? You know, we had they had booked us a hotel in downtown Sydney, and it was fabulous. It was absolutely. The Australians love the Americans, you know, and I think the Americans love the Australians, and we had a few down the street from us, our hotel. There was a park, and they had a few people demonstrating down there, but nothing real serious.
Yeah.
Nothing violent, you know. And then what the Australians did. Well, I was lucky. I had gone to a bar like the first night I was there, downtown Sydney, and I had met this Navy guy that had been there for 3 weeks. So he knew the lay of the land in Sydney. And he says, okay, he said, guys, write this down. So we were sitting at a table having drinks, and he wrote down all the places in Sydney that were giving free drinks to the U.S. military. And they would open their clubs. You know, these private clubs, they would open them, and they had discos then, you know, that you had to pay to get into. And he gave us a list of all those places to go to where we could get free drinks, you know, listen to music, you know, have a great time. And they also, the secretaries and the girls downtown that worked downtown, they would let them in, you know, for happy hour as well. So we got to meet a lot of people, you know, and we had an absolutely fantastic time down in, and we went into the country without a passport because, you know, we went in with military orders.
Right.
You know, so we left the country, went back to Vietnam, and then a couple months later, I said, gee, I'd really like to go back there again. And I found some of the guys were actually taking a leave. You had accrued some leave time, you know. So I said, well, I want to go back to Australia. So they said, okay. If you go back to Australia this time as a civilian, not a military, you had to have a passport.
Oh.
Crap. So I said, okay, so what do I need to do to get a passport? Well, you have to apply, you have to send it in, and you have to go to Saigon and go to the Australian embassy and get a visa. I thought, gee. I mean, it's a long ways from Chu Lai to Saigon, and then we had to take military flights down there, which I did. And then I think the Vung Tau was the place where some of the flights took out of for the R&Rs. So I went to the Australian embassy. I got my visa, my passport. Went to the Australian embassy, got my visa. You know, it was right near the U.S. embassy in Saigon, the one they showed the pictures of when everybody was leaving and everything. And it's one that was run over almost during Tet. There was still a lot of guards there. There was a lot of damage there. So, but they held it for what, 6 hours or something like that. They held the U.S. embassy for 6 hours, and so I went back to the base where their flights were going out of, and I could only go on standby. If anybody canceled, well, of course I didn't get to get on any flights to Australia. So I'm two days into this 7-day leave, and I'm thinking, I got 5 days left, what can I do? So they said, well, you can go to some other country. I said, okay, where can I go? They said, well, you could go to Taipei, Taiwan. I said, oh, interesting. All by myself, wasn't with anybody, any other military guys. So I caught a Northwest Orient flight out of the airport to Taipei, Taiwan, all by myself, and went to Taipei, had the best pizza I think I've ever had in my life in Taipei, and had civilian clothes, didn't really dress in military. I think they knew I was military, but didn't dress that way. But you know, toured the countryside, took taxis out to. I said, take me to a park where there's waterfalls. They'd take me to a place where there's waterfalls and all that, and toured Taipei a little bit. You know, so it was fun.
All right.
It was fun.
Okay. Now, did you stay a full year in Vietnam?
Yes, I landed there. I think we landed there on the 22nd of October. A year and 2 days since I had gone into the Army. And then I think I rotated out the 1st of October, 1968. So I was literally in the Army for 2 years.
Okay. Now, were you counting down the days to leave?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, we were, everybody had a short timer calendar. Okay? And this was my short timer calendar. Can you see that?
Yeah. Okay, so you've got your Army helmet there and the boots underneath. And
And
counting down the days.
And I had 1st of the 46th written on the back here, but yeah, it was, you colored in every day and then you became next. That was on September 30th. So I put Red Cross girls down here. I don't know why I put that down there, but who knows? I think it was probably part of the thing when we had the USO come to the base. The USO troops would come in and they would give us some entertainment. So,
well, there were Red Cross girls, or then in previous wars they were called donut dollies sometimes, but there were women volunteers who would go out. Did you ever see any of those in Vietnam?
No. Yeah, I did, but they never went out in the field with us.
Well, no.
Yeah.
I mean, that was not part of it, but they would come to the bases or whatever.
Yeah. So you were a short timer. How short can you get? So that's what we had. And the other thing is, this is an actual, on our Hill 69, this was an actual flag that flew over our med station on the hill, and that was a combat medical badge that somebody had gone to a village and had made up for us. You know, so they took our CMBs and made that white plastic thing, so I forgot that I had it. I was going through some stuff, and
there it was.
And it's still in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Okay. Now, are there other things that happened in Vietnam that kind of stand out in your memory, or things that you haven't covered? You can check your notes there if you like.
Yeah, I'll check my notes quickly, but yeah, I pretty much covered a lot of the stuff that with your help. that I had gone through. So no, it's funny. When we were deploying out of Fort Hood, our sergeant we called him a lifer. He had been in for 5 3/4 years.
Mhm.
You know, so the guys did not like him. He gave us a hard time. In fact, it was kind of interesting. We had ministers come on the base and come to our area where we were, our bunks were and stuff. You know, in Fort Hood, and anybody they would announce that, you know, over the intercom system, anybody wants to see a Catholic priest or a Lutheran minister or whatever, and apparently the clergy would go through the list, you know, of people that were there on the at that time, and they came on my name, my last name, which was Rosin,
Mhm.
and my last name is spelled with an I-N,
Mhm.
and the Jewish people spelled their name with an E-N, R-O-S-E-N.
Right.
So every time a rabbi would come on the base, you know, they would call me over to the office, and I'd have to go over there and I'd say, "Sorry, Rabbi, that I'm not
You're not Jewish.
I'm not Jewish," but every time they would do that, and I think, Sergeant, you know, this is the 3rd time this has happened. You know, oh, I forgot, you know, that kind of thing. So, but he left. He actually got out of the Army before we deployed to Vietnam. So I didn't tell you about the other thing. Before we were the night before we left, did I say about we all went to the PX and?
Not on camera.
Okay, not on camera. Okay, the night before we were going to leave Fort Hood, we all went to the PX. We had gone to the bar and got, you know, a few beers in us. Then after that, we went to the PX and we said, now what can we do that would be different? So we said, oh, Lady Clairol, you know, hair dye. So we went and picked up boxes of Lady Clairol hair dye, and there were 6 of us. I dyed my hair blonde, completely blonde. One guy, Ray Jones, had pink hair. Another guy had blue hair. Another guy had silver hair. You know, another guy had blonde hair. So we went up the next morning. Every morning you went out for reveille, and they called you attention, and when they showed the colors, we had to take off our hat, you know, and the sergeant was standing there, and he looked again. He did a double take, you know. He says, "You can't do that." We said, "Well, it's done. You know, we did it." He was really flustered. He didn't know if it was legal, military-wise, to do that or not. So a little while later, he came back to us. He said, "You guys are going to have to go to headquarters and get new IDs taken." What? You know, yeah, you have a different hair color. It's not the same hair color that you have on your ID, so you're going to have to get new IDs taken. One guy says, "Well, what happens when our hair grows out?" "Well, just keep your other ID and you can use that at that time." So it was hilarious. You know, we had a really good time. And then in the 3 weeks that we took the ship over, just before we landed, we all got haircuts, you know, before we landed in Vietnam. And by that time, the blonde hair was pretty well gone. But it was hilarious. So we had a good time. So you got to do those things, you know. You guys, and we all knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had a lot of us had gone through basic together, and everything else. So, and that was another great thing. We went over as a battalion, so we all trusted each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then they trusted me as their medic. I trusted them as having my back, you know, when we needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And the confidence level ramped up a little bit after I delivered the baby.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the guys were very, very happy that I was with them, and they were very confident in what I could do.
Mm-hmm.
So that helped that situation a lot. So
Okay.
we had a lot of times at night, we would be sleeping or whatever, and next morning the guys would come to me, and one guy one morning came to me. He says, "Doc, I got a Tootsie Roll in my mouth." I said, "What? Where'd you get a Tootsie Roll?" He said, "Well, I don't think it's a Tootsie Roll." So during the night, we were sleeping in a very wet area on the side of a hill, and a leech
Ugh.
had crawled in his mouth, and his whole front of his lip on the inside, there was a leech in his mouth.
Yikes.
So he said, "Doc, you got to get rid of it." I said, "Okay." Usually with the leeches, if you touch them with a cigarette,
Mm-hmm.
but they would let go. So we then we had what they call the bug juice, the stuff that you put on, you know, like off,
Yeah.
you know, and it was pretty strong stuff. So I said, "Well, whatever his name was," I said, "the only thing I can do is you're going to have to grin and bear it. I'm going to put some of this bug juice on that thing, you know." And as soon as I hit it with the bug juice, it let go. And so, yeah. So yeah, those were interesting. Those were
Mhm.
interesting times. And then one night we were walking on patrol. We were on one hill, and then it was moonlight. You could see another group of guys walking the other direction on another hill, maybe 100 yards away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a column of guys. And I asked one of the guys, I said, "Who are they?" They said, "Oh, they're not us. You know, it must have been the NVA over
Mhm.
there." We never had an issue with them, but they were night walking just like we were doing. So
Yeah. Now, when you were living in the base camp, would that ever get hit with mortars or rockets or anything like that?
well, yeah, the night before we were supposed to leave the country, the 30th of September. So on the 29th of September, on base camp on Hill 69, we turned in our weapons
Mm-hmm.
because we wouldn't be needing them anymore. We turned them all in, and we got ready to go, got ready to pack. And then one of the guys said, he says, "Wow," he says, you don't want to go to the airport." He said, "The Chulai airport," he says, or Da Nang, wherever we were going. I guess it was Da Nang. He said, "They're putting the guys, all the Army guys are being put to duty down there.
Mm-hmm.
They're either painting, they're doing KP, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they're cleaning latrines, they're doing all this stuff for the people that had just left the day before."
Mm-hmm.
You know, I said, "No, we don't want to do that." So we said, "Okay, what we'll do is we'll spend the night here on Hill 69. One more night, shouldn't be a problem." You know, so about midnight that night, we start hearing small arms fire. And then mortars were incoming into this hill, which had never been attacked the whole year that we were there. So they snuck in through some areas. The Viet Cong snuck in. They had satchel charges with them. They blew up one end of the cook's place where they were staying, you know, their hut,
Mm-hmm.
and they were hurt. So we had to treat those guys. We're saying we're there with no weapons. You know, they didn't have any extra weapons. You know, the the Viet Cong were coming in. They were trying to overrun the hill. Well, they fought them back. They were hoping for, since we were leaving the country or had left the hill, the experienced troops that had been there a year had left the hill, that they could overrun it without any trouble. So
Were there new guys there manning the perimeter?
new guys that had just got there, they got indoctrinated real quick.
So did the whole battalion worth of people go at the same time, or did they do you in staggered groups? Or not
Yeah,
everyone?
there was probably 50 of us that went at one time.
Yep.
They didn't do everybody.
Right.
But enough. And we said, later we said, we wrote these guys, and they said, how did they determine this? Well, they said they went and interrogated the people that were in this village just outside the gate, and they had apparently given the Viet Cong information that we had left the hill. The experienced troops had left the hill. They could overrun it, if they wanted to. So yeah, that was. So the night before I flew home, all hell broke loose. But luckily, none of us got hurt that were leaving, and those that got hurt weren't real serious. So yeah, it was an interesting time.
All right. So the next day you successfully get out?
We successfully get out, and when the Braniff International 707 lifted off the tarmac in Da Nang, you heard the biggest cheer you ever heard in your life. So we flew to Japan and refueled, and then we got everybody off the airplane again, and then we flew to Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
We got out of the Army at Fort Lewis in Seattle. So.
Okay. And then how did you get home from there?
Then we flew home from Seattle to Minneapolis, and then Minneapolis, I went to Bay City, and a couple of guys came to Grand Rapids. So
Did you fly in uniform or in civilian clothes?
yes, we flew in uniform.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have any civilian clothes at that time. So one interesting thing was they promised you a steak dinner when you landed at Fort Lewis.
Right.
Welcome back to the U.S. So we stood in line 4 o'clock in the morning, and we stood in line at this mess hall at Fort Lewis, and I saw them take the steaks out of the freezer, literally, and throw them on the grill, on the hot griddle. And that was our steak dinner. And it was good. It was good, potatoes and all that stuff. And the guys didn't feel real good, because we weren't used to eating that stuff after they fed us that meal. That was our breakfast. So I had some Compazine tablets along. So as it being still the medic, I handed those out to some of the guys that didn't feel good. So.
All right.
Yeah.
So, then once you get back home, what do you do?
Well, once I got back home, I took a few weeks off. Then I went back to work for the company that I'd worked for before. I went to Vietnam, and they actually, before I went into service, the 2 years that I spent in the Army, they gave me credit for as time for the company. So the pension and everything went on from there.
What kind of work were you doing for them?
Well, I started out as a draftsman in the engineering department, and then went into the sales layout department, where the company that I worked for sold commercial bakery equipment to companies like Nabisco and Pepperidge Farm and Keebler, the big long ovens and the bread lines also to Tasty Bread and all that type of thing. So I graduated from there, or not graduated, I went up in the company, and I eventually became a salesman in the cookie and cracker side of the business, and sold that equipment, traveled all over the country, traveled to Europe, traveled to Mexico, and selling bakery equipment. My biggest accounts were Pepperidge and Keebler. Got to know how to make goldfish crackers.
Yeah.
So, and then in 1995, when I was working there, one of my bosses came up to me and said, we've been contacted by Benoit Sugar Company in Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to put an American cookie line into their plant in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, well, guys, I said, been there and done that. I don't really want to go back there again. So we went back and forth for a few weeks, and eventually I agreed
Mm-hmm.
to go back to Vietnam in 1995 for 10 days, and flew to San Francisco, and then flew all the way from San Francisco to Hong Kong, and then flew from Hong Kong into Ho Chi Minh City or
Mm-hmm.
Saigon
Right.
in 1995. It was a very interesting experience because when you were in Hong Kong, it was like being in Las Vegas, you know, the lights of the
Yeah,
city and
yeah.
that. Everything was lit up at
Mhm.
night. We took off at night. When we landed in Vietnam, it was like total darkness. There were no lights.
Mhm.
Even the city was not lit up.
Mhm.
You know, and we were coming in to land, and I'm thinking, where's the airport? You know, it's total darkness.
Mhm.
And so they didn't give us too hard a time going through customs.
Mhm.
We stayed in downtown Ho Chi Minh City, I guess it's
Mhm.
called.
Yep.
And just the lifestyle difference of the people, you know. They were nice people. They were all very
Mhm.
courteous and nice. We negotiated with Benoit Sugar Company, and we had to have interpreters. I think the people at Benoit could speak English, but
Mhm.
they only spoke Vietnamese.
Mhm.
You know, so we got the order. We built the equipment in Grand Rapids here, and the ovens and the forming machines for the cookies. And before they shipped them over to Vietnam, they wanted to send their representatives from the factory
Mhm.
over here to test the equipment.
Yeah.
So they sent their representatives over, and we had a lab, and we set the equipment up, and we ran it. We made cookies. So they were all happy. One morning I went in there into the lab, and I could see feet out from under one of the machines. I said, what is he doing? So, you know, I don't know who they had negotiated or purchased equipment from in the past, but there was a guy in there with an electric engraver, and he was engraving in the frame of the machine underneath a code
Mhm.
that, so they were sure that when the machine got over there, that it was the same machine that we tested over here.
Okay.
So, and then it was funny because one of the lab managers, he had to pick him up every morning at the hotel, and he said, those guys, he said, that's all they did was watch X-rated movies, and we had to pay for this.
Mhm.
We had agreed that we would pay for this. And then they would go to the supermarket, and they would buy all fresh fruit. That's all they would eat. They were vegetarians. That's all they would eat, is no meat. So,
Did any of them know that you had been in Vietnam?
yes, I think they did. Yeah, I think they did. They knew it. And in '95, when I was over there, you know, these big deuce and a halves, these big trucks that they ran, they were still running them. The diesels, they were still running. And a couple of them had going down the road with telephone poles from one end of the truck to the other, out the back, right next to the driver. There was no way he could see to the right when he was driving this truck. You know, there you go down the highway with these trucks. So, but the people were very nice over there. They were very courteous. There was no animosity towards the Americans, you know, at that time. So, you know, it wasn't bad.
They won.
What's that?
They won. You can
Yeah,
be
that's
generous at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. So to look back at the time that you spent in the service, what do you think you took out of that, or how did that affect you?
Well, I think what I took out of there was some friendships that I made with the guys. You see the world from a different perspective. You know, you look at things differently. You look at what you have differently. All the conveniences you have, ice cream, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You look at those things, you know, cars and dental care. You know, you look at all those things, and you're very thankful that what you have here, and you still feel, you know, you feel sorry for those people over there that have to go live with that day to day. Even though the communists took that back over again, their lifestyle improved a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but there were still, going down the street, walking down the street, there were still live utility wires, you know, at head level when you were walking down the street. You know, so, but yeah, like I said earlier, the code of conduct, I think, was something that we should all live by. You know, and the help that we gave to those people, you know, stemmed communism for a little while anyway. You know, and I think that personally, it made us feel good. It made us all feel good over there. There was really not much, you know, objection to being over there by the guys.
Mm-hmm.
They were there to do a job. They did the job, and they came home. So,
Mm-hmm. And was it, what was the ethnic mix in your battalion? Were there a lot of black guys, or just a few?
yeah, there was. I would say we were probably 30% black, and then
Mm-hmm.
there were some Orientals,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as well. There were a few guys from Mexico
Mm-hmm.
that were, you know, now are Americans,
Yeah.
but mostly it was white guys, you know. So
Okay.
but,
And were there any racial issues that you noticed in the time there?
none. I didn't see any racial issues at all when I was there. So
Because you were there at the time when Martin Luther King was killed and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, and so, but that was not reverberating, at least where you were.
no, I remember when
Bobby Kennedy. was killed.
Robert Kennedy was killed. You know, that shook everybody up.
Mhm.
You know, and no, the Martin Luther King thing never, at least I didn't pay any attention to it if
Right.
it was bad.
Yeah, well, you had other things to worry about at the time,
Yeah,
I suppose.
right.
So, but because that was still in the aftermath of, well, that stuff was still going on at that point.
Oh, yeah.
There was plenty going on. Yeah. Now, today, are you involved with any veterans groups or things like that?
Yeah, I'm involved with the Veterans of America group. We meet once a month in Grand Rapids. We meet at Marge's Donuts.
Okay.
And I figured I should give back a little bit of my training that I
Mhm.
had from the military. So once a week I volunteer at the VA health clinic in Wyoming.
Mhm.
And I'm not doing any medical things, but
Right.
I'm in the administrative section where people get back to see their patient advocate or
Mhm.
the release of information or the eligibility
Mhm.
thing. I'm kind of the gatekeeper there to let people back. I do that once a week, 4 hours in the morning on Wednesday.
Mhm.
So, yep.
All right. Well, you've done a fine job for us here today, so thank you very much for taking the time to share the story.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do this. I appreciate the opportunity. Like I say, when we came back, you know, just because of the animosity towards the Vietnam veterans, the Vietnam War, we didn't say too much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but as time goes on now, I think it's important that the people hear this from a history standpoint.
Right.
You know, I don't know if they even study the Vietnam War in schools anymore.
There's not a lot in the Michigan State High School curriculum.
Yeah.
You can get a little bit, and it depends on what the individual teachers do. But yeah, not a whole heck of a lot. Yeah, and
But I appreciate what Grand Valley State University's done to do this, and the veterans that I've talked to all appreciate what you guys do. So.